Hi, I'm Darren Brooks. I'm a caver from Cape Range. In the distance you can see the Yardie Creek boat tour boat. That does daily tours up the creek for people to look at, and you can see black-flanked rock wallabies and a variety of birds. We're standing here on the Yardie Creek Gorge Walk Trail. We're standing on the lowest of four terraces. This is called the Tandabidi Terrace. It's really a coastal reef platform comprised of sediments, corals, and all the stuff that makes up a reef, and fore reef and back reef facies in there. And it's an unwarped terrace. It's quite flat. It hasn't been affected by tectonic uplift or rising of the earth or anything like that, as most of the range has, and the other terraces have been affected by this. These corals here once were live, and we would have been washed by the tide on a daily basis, or probably underwater most of the time as well. And this terrace was exposed somewhere around 100,000 years ago, and as you can see, 100,000 years doesn't do a lot to the corals. Even though they're dead now, they're still there, and you can see them while you're walking around. The terrace is also comprised of rock sediments too, which came down as silt and stuff, and back reef marks like sand infills and things like that, and general beach sands. Lots of different types of corals can be seen. There's brain corals and fan corals, and there's all sorts of shells embedded in the corals if you look in the right places. You can see scats of kangaroos and all the other stuff, the debris that occurs over rocks all over the terrace there. On a daily basis, kangaroos come through. Generally we don't see them during the day because they're in hiding, but they are out there. And most of these corals, you can see these just around near the entrance to the Yardie Creek boat cruise and around that area. You don't have to walk far to see these, they're all over the terrace. As we get further up the terrace, so the terrace gets buried in sediments and is covered in brush and scrub, and it's harder to find some of the stuff. And we also start to get some remnants of red sand dunes over there too. There's quite a variety of corals up there. I know near the boat tour bank there is actually a good brain coral sticking out, and this looks almost like an eroded brain coral stem actually, the way it's planed off, and probably fairly heavily eroded now too. So you can see that fact that a lot of the coral polyp openings are now sort of altered into long around the edges where they've been planed off, and you can see the top ones where they're quite short and looking on the ends. So normally you'd be looking at a bulging lump, and it would just have like narrow sections exposed. So when you see those long sections, you can see it's been planed off. These are sedimentary deposits. These are probably part of reef infills and holes in the reef. You start to see these lines there where silts have washed in, and this is probably pinned down earth silts or red sand dune silts. They get washed in, and some of these would have happened during the formation of the reef while the reef was live, and some would have happened at a later stage when the reef was exposed and sand dunes blew over these areas, and sometimes white beach sand dunes and sometimes like red pinned down inland dunes would have drifted across and infilled some of the rock. As we climb higher up on the walk here, we start to get up onto the Tulkey limestone outcropping. This is typical of the cave-bearing limestone in the range, although I don't know of a lot of caves in this area, but there are a lot on the coastal plain which do access through the Tulkey limestone. It gives good lookouts, a good exposure here. The creek is formed along a major jointing system in the limestone. When you look at the map from the air, you can actually see the significant sharp 90-degree bends in the creek, typical of joint-controlled underground river systems and surface drainages as well, which if you look on any map or aerial view of Google Earth of Cape Range, you can see the distinct right-angle bends lefts and rights through the limestone, and the water follows these joints and enlarges them out to make gorges just like this one. This is the only gorge that actually has permanent water in like this, which is has a boat tour on it. There is a small one on the eastern coastal plain, but it's insignificant compared to this. This sometimes is open to the sea. When we get a big rainfall, it washes the sandbar out, and then it's open to the sea, and the tides go in and out here. And it is still tidal controlled at this stage because the water flows through the sandbar, and the tide and the water in the creek here goes up and down with the tides. The Yardie Creek boat tour's in action down there. This is a black-flanked rock wallaby. Its scientific name Petrogale lateralis, but a black-flanked rock wallaby is a much easier thing to remember. Some people call it black-footed rock wallaby, and it has some other common names around parts of Australia where it occurs. These are endemic to the region. They live here. They weren't introduced, and they typically associate with large rock falls, cliff edges, and places of vertical exposure like this where they have good hiding spots, and they can also rest during the day in summer out of the very hot sun in cooler areas inside the rocks, and in the cooler months they can come out and sun themselves, warm themselves up from the cooler caves where they hide during the days. They come out at night and they wander over the coastal plains to feed, and then retreat back to the cliffs during the day, where they laze, rest, sleep, sun themselves, or hide fully out of the heat of the day if they can. The dark green bushes you see on the ground there on the cliffs and around the side are rock figs, and we get white corellas in the gorges. They actually nest in holes in the cliffs, and all over the range where there's large gorges you can often see corellas. The wallabies breed in the gorge, so you'll often see wallabies with a joey. You'll see large males sitting around. Quite often they'll just sit on their haunches on their back with a tail flowing down between their legs. It'll be sticking its head in the pouch to feed because its mother won't let it in the pouch any longer. Although they do rely on the mother for another 6 to 12 months after they've left the pouch to keep feeding from. The red colour of the rocks generally comes from the red staining, mostly iron oxide staining. That's from the red sand dune earth which blows over the range and creates dunes, and comes off the Pilbara block, generally blown across by easterly winds. And it's if you break the limestone open inside, it's generally a pinkish to whitish colour, and the red staining is really surface staining only. The rocks are not red on the inside like they are on the outside. As you can see, the creek's not particularly deep in most places. The area where you're looking at now is the deepest point through there, and it does have some undercutting. This is a fossil screw shell. Because they look a little like a screw in their life form and also in their fossil form, I think a screw shell is a pretty appropriate name for those. Yeah, that fossil's on a much higher level than the stuff on the plain, but when this rock was laid down here, unlike the Tanabiddy Terrace lower down with the exposed corals, this rock was laid down in a shallow seabed. So this was laid down in sediments. So these shells lived on and in the sediments of the shallow sea, at the same time that creatures that lived in the sea above them were dying and dropping their little shells onto the floor to form the sedimentary ooze or silt that eventually became rock when enough layers built up and their pressure was great enough and enough time passed that the ooze became, as they term, lithified or turned into rock. And some of the shells that were inside that silt, you can see them in their form now. They were fossilized, and as the rock's been planed away by erosion and weathering forces, and then we start to see the sections of the shell, so we can see like the cross section of the shell where it's been eroded away. And this screw shell is a fine example of a shell that was laid in the sediment and lived within the sediment itself and eventually died there and was preserved over millions of years. These sediments were laid down somewhere in the region of 50 to 30 million years, somewhere around that mark. And the uplift of the range occurred somewhere between, as best as we know, somewhere like 25 to 15 million years ago. The uplift started to occur and was reasonably rapid in the first few million years and slowed down thereafter. And currently the range isn't rising up any longer. It's been static for quite a few million years. Some of those small caves were dissolved out of the rock when the rock was at the water table level, and as the water slowly passes through the rock, then it also dissolves out. And as chambers get larger, they get a bit more surface area, and so they get more solution action happening, and the caves become larger. So you don't just end up with lots of small holes, you end up with a few larger holes, and lots of small holes too, which didn't quite make it to a big cave. Down the bottom of the creek there, in some places you can see lines of stones which were put there by the indigenous people, and they were designed as fish traps. 100 years ago, the Aborigines were driving fish up the gorge there and into the fish traps, and then they were spearing them with their spears or picking them up with their hands. That's within some people's lifetime still.